What's up, everybody? Peter Exodus O'Coffer back here for another episode of the Personal Branding Podcast. So I'm doing something a little different here. I'm doing the Rolling Stones, but I'm calling it Part 2 because it's kind of, so I did the trios with the Beatles, the Who, and the Rolling Stones. And so the Beatles broke up in the 70s, but the Stones went on and continued to do some great things. So when the Stones came here to the U.S., I believe it was 64, the first place they went was to Chicago Chess Records to see their idols. And they did see these, their idols and earn their respect and had a long history with the black blues musicians of America who, came of age in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The blues was much bigger in Europe with the white Europeans than, to be blunt about it, than here in the U.S. And so the Stones would, on the European legs of their tours, would take the classic blues, B.B. King and Muddy Waters and, the Albert King and Freddie King and Howlin' Wolf and those guys on the road with them and when they toured Europe. So that's the first thing that stands out when it comes to the Stones. Now, as an aside, Eric Clapton also took many of these same blues artists on the road when he toured Europe as well. And so these blues artists did not get the credit they really deserved. Most of them didn't own their own songs. I mean, I mentioned this in another episode. I can't remember which one it was, but it was very common for a black blues artist to put out a song, and then 6 weeks later, Pat Boone or another white artist took the song, got on pop radio, and it went top 10 or top 5, and somebody made a lot of money. I don't believe Pat Boone did mostly cover songs. I don't think he owned his stuff. But he certainly made more money than a blues artist did. The ones who actually wrote the songs. So no, so personally, interestingly enough, I mean, I say that the Beatles really created the concept of the album, and they did. But I actually prefer, the early Rolling Stones albums to the Beatles albums. I think the first great Beatles album was Help, and that's really when the whole concept of the album started to take shape. Now, the Stones did a lot of blues covers, but I prefer blues covers to the early rock and roll covers. I think when I talked about the rise and the fall of rock and roll, I talk about in the 50s these rock guys were in their late 20s, early 30s, and singing lyrically stuff for teeny bopper girls, and why, 35-year-old guy, doing a teeny bopper song. And I love the Beatles' early stuff, but some of it is teeny bopperish, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You. Love the songs, but, the Beatles or the Stones were taking some really downright nasty blues, which the blues was not teeny boppers. They were dealing with adult issues and adult themes and adult stuff, and so I love the earlier Stones albums. Now to the Beatles, being fair, the Beatles started writing their own songs first, and it took a while for the Stones to really get that, define their groove as songwriters. But they didn't have George Martin, in their corner. I mean, George Martin, who was the Beatles producer and was in there for all their great albums until the last couple albums when he wasn't around as much. I mean, I mean, George Martin was probably the foremost, expert in recording records and stuff. He goes back to, the 40s, or certainly the start of the 33 RPM record, going from the 78. So I mean, I had and he knew his musical theory, backwards and forwards. So the Stones had to figure it out, themselves. um the Stones really had a great run there in the late 60s. The Beggars Banquet from 68, Let It Bleed 69, Sticky Fingers, um, 71, and then Exile on Main Street, 72. Some people, I think that's the highest rated album in that the Rolling Stone does for the Stones, is Exile on Main Street. I disagree. And Mick Jagger, thinks that album's overrated too. Not a bad album, but it's not it's not the Stones' best album. Um, but it's interesting because this is the late '60s. They're going up against the Beatles when they're doing uh, Abbey Road, and the Beatles when they're in their prime. You got Led Zeppelin coming up. You got Black Sabbath, drops in the middle of this run from 68 to 72. And interestingly enough, the Stones decide they're gonna, you know, rewind the clock, with the blues. I mean, a lot of people call some of the songs on these albums country, but they're really early blues. If you go and you listen to Robert Johnson, and then trying to distinguish between Robert Johnson, the early country is, but it's most people call it country, but there's some blues aspects too. But it's interesting, the Stones have decided to go acoustic when the rest of the rock world is getting heavier. It takes a lot of guts to do that, and some balls. But the Stones did it, and they pulled it off. I mean, because interestingly, after Exile on the Main Street, they really did not go back to the that acoustic. And actually, some of my favorite albums are Black and Blue, or and Goat's Head Soup, and It's Only Rock and Roll, because that's really when they get back into the blues, the electric blues, which I really love. So I talk about, I just mentioned, Goat's Head Soup and It's Only Rock and Roll and Black and Blue are that's my favorite Stones run. And a lot of Stones fans find that era lackluster, but I like it because they went back to their electric blues, particularly in Goat's Head Soup. They kind of stretch out and do some things that they hadn't done before or since, and they kind of a little looser and really do some interesting stuff. It's not as structured at times on Goat's Head Soup, so I really do like that album. And then in the late '70s, the Stones hit they really hit the jackpot and do very well commercially with Some Girls in 1978, Emotional Rescue in '80, and Tattoo You in 1981, and all those albums went number one, by the way. And My Run, that I like, those albums went number one too. Interestingly enough, going back to, and these are all Billboard. Beggars Banquet only hit 5, Let It Bleed hit 3, Sticky Fingers 1, Exile Main Street 1. So everybody kind of agrees that, that late 60s, early 70s was, the creative zenith for the Stones. But again, I like that middle portion. Where I think things get interesting for the Stones when it comes to the branding is with the rise of MTV. Because the Stones did not change. I talk about, ZZ Top and changing. I love ZZ Top, and they brought the nice looking girls and that the cool ass car and stuff, and they had a great run. But the Stones, what I love about the Stones is They're like, we are who we are, and we're not changing. We're a blues band. People, criticize this, the Beatles fans say, oh, the Stones, they didn't, they weren't pushing the creative, envelope. They weren't doing all these weird, cool things that the Beatles were doing. Well, that wasn't the Stones. The Stones were a blues band, and they were happy to be a blues band. And the Stones never changed. And that's what I love about the Stones. You knew what you were going to get. They gave great blues. They weren't going to change who they were for MTV. Most folks did, and it paid off for them. And the Stones never really had the creative success that they had in the 60s and 70s, with the rise of MTV, going in. But they still made some very good music. I remember I was driving, I was somewhere, I don't know but I really, Undercover of the Night, which I think that was still a top 10 hit for the Stones, but it wasn't, uh, Start Me Up or, one of the smashes there from, that last run by them. And I was like, man, this was a killer song. It's well written. And I was like, so, I mean, it goes, nobody stays on top forever. And these great acts don't stop being great. Younger folks come and do new things, and the younger generations like their own acts, and that's what happens. So what is the Rolling Stones band? I think it's consistency. If you go back to, the first season there of Level Up, the personal branding podcast, I talk about consistency. Hey, they're a blues band. You knew what you were getting, but they were a damn good blues band. And I love, the other thing that strikes me with the Stones is independence, because they weren't changing who they were, and they didn't go, they weren't out there chasing the flavor of the week. And the Stones are timeless. I mean, they went out last, in 2022 and sold out every venue, with probably made more money than anybody else in the road last year. So that speaks for, their legends, and that speaks for, their branding. So can't, end the episode without talking about a little controversy with the Rolling Stones and the power of music. I mean, sometimes I have a way. I think everybody has those secret 5 to 10 songs that they like and they shouldn't like, because the lyrics to go places where they wish the songs would not. So, Brown Sugar. I'm on Facebook. I'm on some of the Facebook groups, Rolling Stone groups, and, basically Stones fans, particularly white boomers, lost their shit when the Stones decided they were no longer going to play Brown Sugar. And it was interesting. It was a little laugh. It was like, well, that was about, Keith Richards' heroin addiction. It's about this. It's about that. Look, I mean, Mick was never really comfortable with, the lyrics of that song. I mean, when he asked about, he was asked a few times publicly, on record about, what the song was about, he always basically was really dodgy. I think, look, the Stones were an edgy band. They were the opposite of the Beatles, and, they wanted to be the bad boys. And this was, as I said earlier, I mean, I think this is Sticky Fingers or Let It Bleed, 69, 70. Zeppelin's coming, Black Sabbath, the Stones wanted to be a little edgy. And that's what they did. When Charlie Watts passed, a drummer, he passed, I believe just last year, they brought in a new member. So now it's, you got 2 African-American members of the band. And I guess they, it's time to put, brown sugar on the shelf. So, look at the lyrics. Come on. I mean, it's talking about a slave owner having sex with a, 14 or 15-year-old black slave girl. I mean, that's what it was about. It's provocative. The NAACP protested it back then and should have. Hey, it's the Rolling Stones song. If they don't want to sing it, they don't have to sing it. That's, it's their prerogative. Now, yeah, this is one I'm going to be just upfront. This is one of my guilty pleasures. I do like the song. I have this weird thing. If I don't like the lyrics, I kind of, in my mind, replace them with something not so offensive. So, I think everybody, I mean, the power of music, music is the international language. I love reggaeton, and half the time I don't know what they're saying. So, because I don't, my Spanish is extremely limited. So, I say that, interestingly though, Mick's first child, a daughter, was African American. And some people say, well, this is about the wife or the mother of his first child, brown sugar. Look at the lyrics. I mean, yeah, it's racist, but it's still a great song. So, as I said earlier, I mean, the Stones uplifted a lot of the blues legends, took them out on the road. The Stones have never been shy about their blues roots. So, I mean, I don't think the Stones are racist. They put a lot of money in the bank accounts of these blues legends and really, helped them out when they needed it because, the record industry certainly didn't do anything for these blues legends, and a lot of it was, the Stones and Eric Clapton, and I do believe as well that U2 did take some of these great blues legends out on the road in Europe with them as well. So, I mean, it's the Stones being provocative. And it is what it is. So anyway, still love me, the Rolling Stones. Still a classic band. And I guess that's it for this episode. So subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. Listen to my music. I got 4 albums. Working on the number 5. They're here on the channel. And I also, they're on all the streaming services. And then I do have 2 science fiction fantasy novels and a novella on Amazon. So support my creative endeavors, if you will. And I appreciate you coming through. And I will see you next episode.